The second scripture reading for this morning comes again from Isaiah, but it is now the 35th chapter. We have left the time of Isaiah in the court of the kingdom of Judah, and we are now receiving words to the people who have been exiled. The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. Strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who are fearful of a fearful heart, be strong. Do not fear. Here is your God. God will come with vengeance, with terrible recompense. She will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy. For waters shall break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. The haunts of jackals shall become a swamp. The grass shall become reeds and rushes. A highway shall be there, and that shall be called the Holy Way. The unclean shall not travel on it, but it shall be for God's people. No traveler, not even fools, shall go astray. No lion shall be there, nor shall any ravenous beast come upon it. They shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. And the ransomed of the Lord shall return, and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness. Sorrow and sighing shall flee away. May God's blessing rest upon the experiences of Scripture for us on this day. May it guide the meditations of our hearts and the words of my lips. We've been spending a lot of time with the prophets. Probably not as much as we need to, but we're spending a good amount of time with the prophets. Last week, we had a message from Ezekiel. And if you didn't get enough Ezekiel, let me plug Bible study. And if you like what's going on, let me plug disciples-related colleges, seminaries, and universities. And if you think we could do better, let me plug disciples-related colleges, seminaries, and universities. But here we are. Here we are in the prophet Isaiah. Like I said, we've heard from two different sections these visions of redemption, of restoration that God is going to bring. We had the first that came from Isaiah's time in the court. The northern kingdom is in trouble. Things are going poorly for them. And yet we have this image of renewal, of bringing the people together again, of taking those who are scattered and redeeming them. And now in this 35th chapter, we continue that idea that people have been scattered. They have been alienated in some way, shape, or form. Now, in the exile, this is a physical alienation. We have a group of people, a portion of the population, who have been removed from Jerusalem and Judah and have been taken west into Babylon. A portion of the population. Physical detachment. In the news, in the world today, we are very much aware that there are a lot of people who are physically detached from their places of being. Sometimes it is because of violence and conflict. It could be nation fighting nation in war, like we saw in Scripture. It could be more community strife. It could be social upheaval. It could be disasters that are considered more natural than anything else. And we might be able to imagine the anxiety that comes with being physically displaced from home. There's lots of reasons why that displacement can occur. Sometimes it is a matter of finances, sometimes it's a matter of family interactions, but the trauma that takes place when we cannot be where we want to be or long to be is very real. And it causes us certain anxiety. We might not even realize, we might have chosen to go on the trip, and we don't know just how anxious we are over it until we get home and lay in our own bed again. And finally sleep well after 2 weeks of the vacation that we wanted. And we realize just how tired we were because of the anxiety of being displaced. So maybe on some level we can connect with those exiles. But it's not just a physical dislocation that Isaiah is talking about. Isaiah is talking about also a spiritual dislocation. Being separated from the cult. And this is not a negative sense of the word. This is the sense of the worshiping body. Being displaced from the community that worships God, that makes offerings to God, that receives the blessings of God. This is a religious, it's an emotional, it's a psychological separation that takes place, and all of those things cause anxiety. And we know nowadays, thanks to science and all of those things, that stress upon the psyche, upon the spirit, leads to physical manifestations. So it's not just being physically removed and having to travel any great distance that these exiles are dealing with. They have been separated from home and from family for a long time. And even though they are told to put down roots in Babylon, we hear that the exile has taken its toll. When people are separated from the places that are home, it takes its toll. The prophet talks about physical tolls. The separation of body and mind and soul from the ground of being that we build ourselves upon causes us to have weak knees, the prophet says, or hands that do not do the work that they are called to, or perhaps even hearts that flutter a little strangely out of fear. And that fear and that anxiety can cause us to do a great many things. Sometimes that fear and anxiety response to something that's going on can lead to heroism. It can lead to great acts of strength. It can lead to people charging into situations that the rest of us are attempting to flee from. It can lead to people going and being the helpers that Fred Rogers told us to be on the lookout for. Fred was a prophet. He might have had a kid's show, but he was a prophet. But that anxiety, that anxious heart that is within us sometimes, especially when we are dislocated from things, can also lead us and allow space for less honorable and glorious things. It opens us up to being easily misled or distracted. It opens us up to the sins of idolatry as we attempt to take on the things of God or even make ourselves God for the sake of safety and security. It allows us to be easily gaslit this anxious heart when we are dislocated. But Isaiah is offering images and visions of a restoration, of a redemption, of a return. And he starts by pointing out that if you want to get from Babylon back to Jerusalem, to Mount Zion, the high holy place, the location of the temple, here's your geography lesson for the day, you can follow the path that Abram took many generations before, which was to go up and around following the fertile river crescent. The more direct route, the straight route, is to cross the desert that stands between these two places. To return to the place that God is calling the people to means crossing this desert wilderness, and no matter how anxious and upset we might be, there is very few of us who would be very interested in crossing a desert. A desolate sort of wasteland experience where there's jackals and lions and perhaps tigers and bears, oh my. And yet, Isaiah's image that he receives from God, that he delivers to the people, is one that says, listen, we know that the glory of God is capable of incredible things. We know that God makes the desert bloom. And let me tell you, when you are returning from that place of exile, wherever it may be, physical, psychological, emotional, when you are traveling back to this place of wholeness, wherever it may be, that path is going to be amazing. In full bloom. It's going to be glorious by God. We get images of the desert receiving the showers of blessing that we might be inclined to sing about every once in a while. Nudge, nudge, nudge. And it springs forth with life. And we were told that along that path, the jackals and the lions and anything else that might be out there are going to be a non-issue. We're told that that path is wide enough that even the fool, thanks be to God, won't wander off of it. I can be directionally challenged. You know, we lived in Great Bridge for like 4 years. And it was only in the last 2 months that I learned a second way to get to the mall. One path. Through the wilderness. I was good. The fool will not wander from it. We are told this vision for the people in exile is one of bringing everyone together again. And that's where NRSV unfortunately lets us down a little bit. It's usually a really solid translation to go by, but this is why you should always have multiple translations. Because in the NRSV, it talks about God's vengeance. And I have a very specific vision of what vengeance looks like. It's not a godly understanding. What the Hebrew is suggesting is that this moment of glory, of restoration, this vision of transport back to the places of wholeness is not an issue of vengeance. The Hebrew is more along the lines of restorative justice. Restorative justice. And that's a term that's sort of entered our lexicon in the last, maybe 20 plus years or so. One of the great examples of it is South Africa post-apartheid, in the attempts to recognize generations of dislocation. The power of this pseudoscience of race in separating. And I'm reminded that in the last 2 weeks we have marked anniversaries of these sorts of separations, 100 years since the First World War, 80 years since Kristallnacht. That's somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 years for Jonestown today. That's one that hits a little close to home for disciples. But this restorative justice moment that God is calling for is a reconciliation of the people. It is an acknowledgement that when people are dislocated and set aside, when they are pushed, they have been traumatized in the soul, but those who have pushed them out are also damaged in the process. Humanity, the godly image that is within us, is distorted. And so God is seeking to bring it all back together again, along this wide path. Back to Zion, back to the temple, back to God, when all of the nations, this isn't a geopolitical thing, this is a nations in the sense of a people and how they understand themselves kind of thing, all coming back together again. It is a serious redemption vision. The blooming of the desert and the restoration of the people. It is something that I think we get to experience in increments off and on throughout our lives. I think in some ways we understand that we are traveling this road, and yet we also understand that there are moments when we are very much dislocated, when we are separated from. There are certain things that have been named that have been generation-long processes, and it will take generations of serious work to restore and rebuild. And then there are the moments that happen within a single lifetime. But I believe very strongly that that path is there. And that even in my wandering back and forth, I can keep on it. And then each step, each moment, each turn of the wheel, each day itself, we are going that much further toward that ultimate time together. In the meantime, we get to be church today. We get to be a people who proclaim these visions of redemption. A people who get to wrestle with them and try to live into them. And to God's glory, one day, the fullness will come. And to God's glory, today, we're going to work on it. Thanks be to God. Amen.